What's up, everybody? Patrick back again. We're back here with our parable series in Matthew, and we're going to continue on right down the line with the next one in Matthew 13, which last week we did the parable of the four soils, if you've got an old Bible, or the modern version is the parable of the sower. So we're going to continue on right down, and we're going to start in verse 24 today. And we're actually going to skip over a couple more parables because there's an explanation of this parable later on in the chapter. In the coming weeks, I'll get through the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the yeast, which actually directly follow this. So that's why I'm going to skip ahead, just so you all know. So without further ado, it won't take long unpacking everything this time. Let's get into it. So Matthew 13:24. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servant came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring them into my barn." So that pretty much wraps up the parable of the wheats and the tares, but Jesus goes on to explain this, and it picks up again in Matthew 13:36. So let's jump there real fast and hear Jesus' explanation, and then we'll be back to go through all the terms. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun and in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." Alright, so that pretty much wraps up Jesus' explanation, and now let's go into defining some terms here, and it's a lot shorter than the video I did on the evil farmers 2 weeks ago, so you're in luck. First of all, we have Son of Man, which is Jesus. Countless times in the Gospels he references himself as the Son of Man. But more importantly to this parable, it can represent those that have become like him as well. Son of Man is kind of an honorary Jewish title. It's related back to Daniel because Daniel references it. It's pretty prominent in his visions. But the term Son of Man is more a honorary title in Jewish tradition. We have the field, which again is the world, much like in the parable of the evil farmers, which was a vineyard. We have the harvest, which is the end of the age, Revelation, fire and brimstone, whatever you want to call it. You have the harvesters, which are angels. Good seed, which represents sons of the kingdom. And then bad seed, which represents sons of the evil one. Jesus does a pretty good job unpacking this, but I do want to go back and just sort of read the parable again now that we've defined these terms, and just kind of unpack what's going on here. But real quick before I do, I want to flash this picture up on the screen here real fast. Right here is a picture of weeds and tares, and that demonstrates kind of what Jesus is talking about and why they look you can see they look similar, and that's really important, kind of the message Jesus is getting across here. The second picture here, as you can see, is the differences between a tare, which is also a darnel plant, and wheat when they're fully matured and ready to be harvested. So I just want to flash that up for you guys because it's important to the overall message of this parable. So let's go back to the parable of the weeds. I'm just going to break down line by line. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like. Just real quick, that term kingdom of heaven is, anytime Jesus uses that term, I want you to immediately think of your eternal being or your heart. I really should point here because this is what makes you you, your brain. And what is that like? The kingdom of heaven represents the realm in which the Father rules your inner being, and the place in which you are like Jesus and like God and like anything that's good in this world. So that's an important definition to have. So Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So we see that the seed is sons of the kingdom, and the Son of Man is Jesus. And if we reflect back onto the parable of the sower, remember the seed can also represent the Word of God. So Jesus is sowing the Word of God, the gospel, how to become like Him, how to transform your inner being to conform to the image of the Father. Those are all very biblical terms, but basically He spreads seed throughout the world, and these seeds ultimately will grow up to become sons in the kingdom. The devil also comes in and sows bad seed, or his enemy, Jesus' enemy, comes in and sows bad seed. They end up becoming the sons of the devil, or the sons of the world, if you want to look at it like that, those who are not of the kingdom. So we see that happen, and let's continue on. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. So we see you grow up, you mature as a human being. It's a metaphor or idiom, if you want, of growing up. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" So you see the servants are talking here about just uprooting the problem and let's fix it. But this is, I think, where this parable gets really interesting in the response of the man or the farmer who sowed this field. The farmer answers, "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring them into my barn." So we see that the farmer says don't pull them up. And if let's just think about this in a real world application real fast, is if you've got a field of wheat full of tares as well, those roots are intertwined together. So if you pulled them both up, you're going to kill the tare. Yeah, that's going to happen. But you might also pull up the wheat and kill that as well. So let's kind of take this to a, I guess, spiritual level. I find this really interesting because it's this idea that those in the kingdom are going to grow up around those who are of the world. And that concept is really cool to me because what does that mean for us? I mean, the whole point of these videos is to try and pull out some sort of practical application. The application is we're always going to deal with quote-unquote evil people, if you want to call them that, or unhealthy people who are not of God in this world. We're always going to have people who are of the devil, if you will. And why do they exist? Why are they around? Why don't we just get, okay, you're part of the kingdom now, you get taken out of the world? And I think the real key to that is because those people exist to be our tests. We're going to see next week when I do the parable of the mustard seed and the yeast, especially in the yeast, it's Jesus unpacking the whole idea of kind of working out, becoming like Him. Like, just real quick, the preview of what that's going to be is the whole idea of working yeast and working it into dough, that's hard work. You would have to do it by hand. I mean, now we have mixers and stuff like that, but still, back then you would have to work it by hand, and it's a struggle, and it takes time. And the whole idea there is it takes time to grow the kingdom within you and to become like Jesus. It takes time, it takes trial and error, it takes facing tests and the fire, which is another parable down the road that where Jesus talks about the house built on a good foundation. The whole thing about that is dealing with trials. The weeds remain because they're going to be your tests. They're going to be your trials. They need to be there, because if God just pulls them up, he might just pluck out, people who would ultimately become a part of his kingdom. And he is the end all be all. He knows what we need to go through to get there, based on who he's chosen. So I love that he leaves this in here, that we're going to grow up around the world. And the second thing here is, as you saw in those pictures that I showed earlier, a wheat and a tare look so different. Which, let's kind of jump down to Jesus' explanation of when, the farmer says, let them both grow together. So we're going to grow up around the world. At that time I will tell my harvesters, first collect the weeds, tie them into bundles to be burned. Jesus goes on to explain this, and he says, sorry, I just lost my place in my analog Bible here. Yes, the harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels. They will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw him into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, so we saw in the picture that both wheat and tares look similar. And that's a very key point. They look very similar until, of course, come harvest time, where it's time to collect fruit. Jesus will go on and talk about recognizing people by their fruit. Many will come in my name, claiming to be me. You'll know them by their fruit. Being part of the kingdom means you produce fruit in the kingdom. Means you look and act like Jesus. Jesus at other times says, if you don't see the Father in me, then you don't know the Father. Because his being was that of God's. Our being can be that of God's. The reason I think there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth is once we get to that point where whatever happens at the end, I don't claim to know, and I think this video would be way too long if I try to even begin unpacking what is going to happen in the end. I think there's going to be a lot of people that look like Jesus and think they are like Jesus and think they are of the kingdom, that when they get up there and God says to them, I never knew you, it's going to be just like another parable where I'm thinking of a lot of parables today where they say, Lord, I did all these things for you, and I went to church all the time, and I had successful YouTube channels, and I fought against atheism and Islam and whatever, fill in the blank religion here, or fill in the blank other belief than Christianity here, and God's going to say, I never knew you. Be gone with you, you wicked worker of iniquity. And so that whole idea that there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, I think is because it's only until you see the fruit that you know if it's wheat or tare. And a lot of times I think tares, aka people of the world, believe they are wheat. And when they find out they're not, it's a challenging thing. And I remember when I found out that I was, at the time, a tare, I was very distraught, because I was like, what? I spent 25 years doing the wrong thing. It's a hard thing to take. And there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, because people who have spent their whole lives living for God now ultimately are like, sorry, I never knew you. So that's why I believe there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it's also why I think it's another critical thing in this parable is wheat and tares look the same until it comes time to produce fruit. So how can we apply that to people? Because all Jesus is talking about is people, of course. People of the world and people of the kingdom are going to look somewhat the same. A good deed and a bad deed, a good deed, a good authentic deed that comes from truly the Spirit and is holy to the Lord is going to look the same as a deed that's done out of the flesh nature or something that's rejected by the Lord. what you really have to get into is analyzing someone's inner nature, their heart, their soul, who they are. And that doesn't happen by just, do you believe in Jesus and do you believe the Bible, or do you believe my X set of beliefs? That happens by having a conversation with them, seeing how they respond, seeing how they kind of react. And I'm always going to tell people, make time to have conversation, make time to have relationship with any and everybody. I mean, you're not going to have a relationship with everybody in this world, because ultimately there's just too many people. But the people you do choose to have actual relationship with, make time to get to know them and see where their inner nature is at. And that's pretty much wraps up the whole idea of this parable. Is just kind of want to recap here, is like wheats and tares look the same, and we don't know until it's harvest time and we see the fruit. And God's going to be the one that judges that, and God's going to be the one that knows your inner nature. And the second most important thing is, we're always going to grow up with those around the world. So take joy in that and understand that those people in the world are there to test you to produce good fruit and become more like Jesus in your inner being. As always, guys, I appreciate you here. Let me try that again. As always, guys, I appreciate you showing up, watching these, taking what is now, 15, 20 minutes out of your day to listen to my teaching. Give a like, give a subscribe, comment below if you think it means something different. Let's have a discussion about it. I'm always down for that. And I always like to leave you guys, to those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, may you be blessed in all that you do. Peace out, guys.